Hold on. I'm a fool. Okay.
Yeah, it was only
May this please work again finally.
because at the end of the live stream red line thing, I hear myself saying 256 meg of L3 cache, which of course was we were very first setting up.
Yes.
There's now 570 live. Introducing residual. I didn't want to. I'm skipping. Hey, that's better.
It's working?
Yeah.
All right, finally. Okay. So, if you're just joining us, okay, yes, thank you. I see chat now. Finally, it's working. I barely know what I'm doing. I apologize. Jim is sick this week, and I decided to try to take it on myself for the first time using YouTube, and it's been an unmitigated disaster, as you would expect. I have Josh with me.
Me,
Look, I have
Josh.
Josh, the Josh D. Walrath. I know. I apologize for the keyboard sounds. I'm trying to do all this switching and everything with this makeshift setup in front of you, which includes a random 25-inch monitor right here. But it's something on the internet live,
It is
and
something.
my mouse clicks as I switch between the two feeds, Josh and myself. Apologies for that. Okay, so if you're just joining us, Josh and I just completed a brief talk about the Ryzen 3990X, right? The incredible 64 core, basically a consumer version of an EPYC with higher core clocks, right?
Yeah.
Now, one thing I forgot to ask you, memory support, and this is something I should just look up. Is the Threadripper going to support ECC? Is that how do they differentiate this from the EPYC part?
4 memory channels, DDR4. I don't think it says anything about ECC. So that's going to be kind of the key difference
Yeah.
because they don't obviously want you to run ECC on a workstation machine. Well, I mean, in workstation machine, that's an edge case that you probably should, but they don't want you to spend $4,000 on essentially an EPYC processor when you could buy an actual EPYC processor with ECC support for 7,000 or whatever, or 11,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just crazy to me that they're offering even even without ECC, even if you don't have the
Is
same.
EPYC 8 channels memory,
I
or
thought
is it
so.
4 as well? I can't remember. These things just. But you get all the PCI Express lanes.
That's true. There has to be
Yeah.
some sort of point of differentiation, is my
Yeah.
point. Because how else
Yeah.
could you sell something that on the EPYC side is 7 grand to consumers with higher core clocks for only $4,000?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you think about it,
We'll
it's
find out
actually
more soon,
really
I
cheap.
think.
Yes, we will.
So, yeah.
Um, Moving on, the bigger news for consumers than a $4,000 workstation processor would be the new mobile parts, and this is really really exciting. 2019 we had Ryzen 3000 mobile, but of course it was actually Zen Plus. It was 3000 in name only,
Yeah.
and they
12
introduced.
nanometer, not that great of powering down type technology. Compared to what Intel had, the Ryzen 3000, you can get some core clocks up there. You can get some good threads, but it just was not the same mobile experience. And the people who have the Surface 3 with the AMD parts are they may not be entirely happy as compared to its battery performance in certain applications as compared to the Intel version of that. But at least AMD is in there, and it's a semi-custom chip, sort of. At least that's what they say. But the 4000 series is a whole different beast entirely. What we know, I mean, it's 7 nanometer, so they get a huge performance and power jump just by that. And then you add in all the goodies that the Zen 2 architecture has, um, which is fantastic and performs well. And they had, another design cycle where they could develop a more robust mobile strategy than what they had before. And so when you combine these things, I mean, it looks like AMD has got a very fast, a very power friendly part that's not going to drain the battery like the Ryzen Mobile 3000 series. Um, and they may actually have a few advantages over Intel. I think overall Intel is going to still have advantages over the entire ecosystem of software, firmware. Their chips are still more highly optimized there. And so I think Intel is still going to have some advantages, but AMD is now competitive. I don't think it's world beating, but it's competitive. And their upside for these are tremendous, and it's going to be very interesting to be able to get hands on these parts and see how big of a jump it actually is from 3000, and then of course how it compares to the new Intel 10 series parts that they've been showing off, which are still a combination of 14 nanometer plus 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 and then 10 nanometer stuff. And so it's going to be pretty fascinating to see. What were your impressions of the release?
I'll use this as a very quick jumping off point as I move. See if I can actually do this. I'm trying to create a alternate view here where I actually have the site up. Hold on a second. Should have done this beforehand, but hey, it's live. And let's go back to here we go. Okay, so my impressions. I'll start from there. So the one thing that first of all that I was going to ask you about is the integrated Vega graphics. I was not really expecting that because I'm thinking in terms of the products I've seen with this so far. Like we've seen an ROG, a high-end gaming laptop using the Ryzen 7 4800HS, which is a 35-watt variant of the 4800H that was announced. That's if I go down to the specifications here, that is an 8-core, 16-thread part, 2.9 gigahertz base, 4.2 boost, 8 GPU cores. These are Vega cores.
Mm-hmm.
So you at least are afforded some sort of graphics option if you're going to integrate one of these in a system without a discrete GPU, which for an ultrabook form factor that makes a lot of sense. How much do you think that would negatively affect adoption of these new mobile parts in a world where most of the ultra thin and lights are relying right now on Intel graphics? Do you think 8-core Vega is sufficient? Is this just desktop productivity type work?
That's a good question because I mean, they're claiming it's like there's a 56% uplift from previous Vega with this, and that's a combination of optimization of that architecture, clock speed advantages, and so I think for most machines it's going to be more than enough. I mean, a lot of people obviously were expecting Navi, and when you start looking at the timeline of when that graphics technology was released in kind of big form, I don't think that they really had enough time to try to integrate that in and people binging me, um, get it working in a timely manner. And so, next year we'll probably see, a new mobile with Navi graphics in there. But it does make sense that Vega was going to be the choice just because of the timing of the design cycle. You don't want to have a Zen 2 architecture that you finally got that down, and then you're trying to also then integrate in a brand new Navi architecture into a really super integrated chip. And yeah, I think that they are just like the safest bet and the best thing we can do is just do Vega here, and they did, and I think that is a perfectly okay decision. Again, performance is going to be very, very interesting when we finally see it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's until we get our hands on that and put it through the ringer and see what kind of different TDPs they're at and how performance scales going from, the 15 and 25 watt to the 35 and 45 watt units. And it's not disappointing to me that they're using Vega. I mean, sure, it'd been nice to have Navi, but I think Vega is a better known architecture, and especially one that's already been integrated into mobile. And they haven't done that with Navi yet. And so it's probably very, very risky to even consider that. And yeah, I mean, super hyper optimized Vega for mobile.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to do perfectly fine there. But overall, yeah, I just cannot tell you how big of a jump in the mobile space this is for AMD, because process technology, it's their first time they've ever had Intel by the short and curlies in terms of something like this. And I mean, that was Intel's bread and butter. Even when they had bad architectures, they were still able to keep up because they had a process advantage. And now it's gone. And AMD is working closely with TSMC, and TSMC is making some serious cash because Apple, AMD, and others, and then soon NVIDIA is going to be with them as well. Yeah. Exciting stuff.
Let me. There's the mouse cursor.
Hmm.
Let me attempt to recalibrate myself over here.
I'm doing a poor job of recalibrating myself, period.
Okay, thankfully. Okay, there we go. All right, here we are. So yeah, I mean, you had mentioned we'll have to see how performance goes, how it scales from 35 to 45 watts. I think that's interesting because I mean, this is the same architecture as desktop. It's being scaled down, obviously. One of the ways you can do that and hit those lower TDPs is, I would assume just binning and lower clocks. So if they're going to be a lot less aggressive with those peak frequencies, then we're not going to see anywhere near desktop performance, of course, depending on how the cooling systems look, how big the form factors of these laptops are. But I would love to see, I guess we should do some testing internally and see, like clock for clock, how these perform against Intel, because some of the Intel parts, like the 10 nanometer stuff we've seen so far, has really, really low base clocks. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking 1.8 gigahertz or even 1.1 or even 1.0 gigahertz for a base clock on Ice Lake.
Yeah.
So I I wonder how much more. I mean, Intel very very optimized on mobile. It's not by accident. I mean, there's various factors, but it's not by accident that Intel has ended up being such a leader in mobile. I also wonder how Intel's relationships with these laptop makers is going to affect the ability of AMD to make any kind of headway into the market. But do you you work somewhere that deploys laptops, right?
Yeah.
And you have to support this. How long has it been since you've supported an AMD laptop in a corporate environment?
It's been
Ever?
never,
Yeah.
never. Yeah, I
So
mean, we build desktops for the power user, and we typically go with AMD stuff just because price, performance, and thread. Um, but all the Dell laptops we get are all um, they're all Intel based, and we get the best pricing for that and best overall experience. But looking at Dell as one of the launch partners of that, and they had their the G5, or is it the GS? I can't remember. Their gaming laptop.
I don't know the actual model. I was thinking about
Yeah,
the Zephyrus stuff that they just announced that has the new
yeah,
4000 in it, but
yeah. But they're going to be supporting those, and you're going to have better configurations going forward with these new Ryzen 4000 series than before. I mean, because there's the big hubbub about Intel showing off these graphs of their top end mobile with a 2080 mobile, and they compared it against an AMD model with like a 2060 or something, and people were yelling a big old fuss. But the basis of that is you can't get an AMD part with that top end graphics chip anywhere. And so that was kind of Intel's point. Is like if you want the best performance in this form factor, you're going to go Intel because we are getting matched with the highest end GPU, and AMD has nothing like that. And I think that's going to change rather quickly. Like next quarter, we'll probably see higher end Dell chips doing that. I mean, they've had their hands on these for a while now, and they know what it can do, and they know what the battery's like, and they're still probably working closely with AMD to make sure all the firmware and microcode and stuff is where it should be. But just another area. And do you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Not really. I mean, my only thought about this, as far as their like making inroads against Intel, is what we have seen from Intel is for the higher performance mobile parts, they're still on 14 nanometer. So for like the 6 and 8 core parts, they were on 14 nanometer in 2019. There was just a few of the lower power 10 nanometer Ice Lake chips out there in a few random laptops. So by and large, if you wanted high performance, you were on 14. The way I look at this is AMD has the huge process node advantage, and we're talking about 4, 6, and 8 core mobile parts. So it seems like my concerns from the past, just my past experience with AMD on mobile, was higher power draw, more heat, and Intel had the IPC and process advantage, and that's not the case anymore. So whether or not Intel still has an IPC lead, I just find it interesting to think about an AMD coming into the market with 35 or 45 watt parts that have 8 cores and 16 threads for a mobile workstation, when the only way Intel can match that is probably to be at the same 45 watt mark and facing the same kind of thermal challenges, and they're doing it at 14 plus plus until they can get 10 nanometer plus scaled up to the point where they can release a high performance 8 core part.
Mhm.
But they're not ready for that yet.
No.
We're still waiting for just mainstream adoption of lower powered, like quad core parts.
Yeah.
Every laptop, like you're talking about the corporate deployment of laptops and how you use Dells and it's Intel everything. Every laptop I've used in the last couple of years has been some sort of Intel Core i5 or Core i7 mobile part. And if it had discrete graphics, it was an NVIDIA GPU, like an MX series if it was the low power, or maybe like a mobile like 1060 or something if it was a gaming laptop at the low end.
Mhm.
And that's just been the way it was. And you can find AMD desktops at any of the big box stores or online, and they're typically lower powered, lower cost systems. And it wasn't until Ryzen happened that you would go to any of the e-tailers or any of the big box stores and see front and center like some big AMD powered system where you had an AMD CPU, and you didn't necessarily have an AMD GPU, but on
Because let me
mobile,
tell you, Excavator Core was not doing it on the mobile space for them.
no. No. And yeah, we could talk about this more, but really it's kind of a wait and see thing, so we don't have anything in hand. But like you
Yeah.
said, these laptop makers have had product in hand for a while. They've been refining these designs and they've announced a few. My favorite was the ROG, the Zephyrus G14 and G15, which look great. And these are that marriage of AMD and NVIDIA, best friends forever, where you have a RTX 2060 paired up with a Ryzen 7 4800HS, and that looks like a dynamite combination right now. I don't know
Hmm.
pricing on those yet. They didn't reveal pricing, but those are coming somewhere in Q1, Q2. So that's apparently the time frame for these mobile parts to hit the market. So
Yeah.
by the middle of the year, we'll have some stuff.
Boy, and you know what? Another thing that AMD did very, very well is it's all integrated into one chip. It's not chiplets with this. It's the 8 core, 16 thread plus Vega plus all the IO stuff. And I think the idea is that it's about 150 millimeters square, which is a little bit bigger than some people think it should be. Like 110 to 120 is what a lot of these highly integrated large mobile chips come in that size. But I mean, you look at the Apple A13, and that's 100 millimeter square. So if you think, you've doubled that, you've got 8 cores, 16 threads, 8 core Vega, all the I/O, all the SATA, PCIe Express. We don't know how many lanes this thing has yet, which is kind of a bummer. I hope it's going to be more than like what the 8 that the previous one did, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have at least a full 16 or 20, but I don't know. We don't have all those details yet. But theoretically, this is going to be the same chip that will be going into the desktop, but we're going to see higher TDPs and higher performance and
Yeah.
higher base clocks and maybe some higher boost in certain things, and certainly the Vega going a whole lot faster when they hit the 65 to 95 watt range in these parts. But yeah, they've taken all that and put it into one chip, and it's I think for everything it's got, it's pretty compact in my view. Other people may not share that same opinion, but I think that they did a pretty good job with layout and getting as small as it is, because it's essentially about the size of a thumbnail.
Yeah.
So it's not a big die by any stretch of the imagination. I think Piledriver was like 225 millimeters square, and those things were selling for dirt cheap.
One last thing on AMD, because of course they also had a GPU segment, and this I was just going to pick your brain about this a little bit because I haven't talked to you about it yet.
Yeah.
The Radeon RX 5600 XT was announced, and they
Mhm.
didn't go into a lot of detail on tech specs, like the actual, you know, the GPU that's being used. I assume it's Navi 10, because if you look at it, it looks like the 5700 with lower clocks at first glance, and it also has
Yeah.
less memory.
Yeah, so they've cut down one of the memory channels. That's what, 464 bit, and it's 192 bit with 6 gigs
Yeah.
of memory.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks like it's cut down 5700 XT.
Right. And so the 5700, yeah, same core count as 2304 streaming processors. Like you said, lower memory, and it's cut down. So it goes from 256 to 192, so less memory bandwidth. I thought they needed a 6 gigabyte card, though. If you think about it, like the 5500 was definitely limited by only having 4 gigabytes of frame buffer. And I remember after I posted our review of that, there was some talk. I don't remember where, if it was on Reddit or who had reported this, that you could show the difference in the bandwidth of the card, because it's a PCIe 4 card. The 5500 XT is what I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
but it's only by 8. So if you were not using it on PCI Express 4, you were not getting the same amount of bandwidth you could. So anybody plugging it into an older system and not taking advantage of the latest AMD only PCIe 4 would run into issues if anything ever wanted to exceed the 4 gigabytes of available frame buffer and was having to use system memory. It was getting bogged down by literally having half as much bandwidth through
Huh.
PCIe. So
Okay.
you could actually create a use case where you slightly exceeded the frame buffer and it was using system RAM and it would run faster. So of course the 8 gigabyte variant of the card was a better way to go if you were ever in that scenario. I don't know why you would be, because the card was built for 1080p like high, 1080p
Yeah.
medium high settings. But a 5600 XT, it's just a lower clocked 5700 with a little bit less memory and lower memory bandwidth. And also the memory is clocked lower. Like it's like they just took everything down to
Yeah.
help
A notch.
differentiate these two products. Do you think there's enough here to justify the $279 price point, considering a 5700 around, it's not holidays anymore, it's like Black Friday, we saw them like 289. They were at
Hmm.
Micro Center last week for 299 if you went in person. We're buying like a reference design.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's what, 320
Yep.
or so.
Yep,
Or
319 on like Newegg right now.
yeah. I don't know. That's kind of a hard sell. At 289. Maybe at 269, but
Well,
then you're encroaching on the 5500 XT and
yeah, it's 279 if that helps.
279. Yeah,
But yeah,
I
it's
don't know.
it's 30 or 40
Yeah,
dollars away from a 5700 with more and significantly faster memory and
yeah,
way higher clocks.
yeah.
The clock speed difference is pretty huge. Like it was 400 megahertz. So
Yeah. It's it's a segmentation that they wanted to put in to be able to fight against the 1660 Ti and do it effectively. And I think that they're doing that fine then if that's their target. But the consumer who hasn't bought a 1660 Ti yet, maybe they're not really all that willing to buy a 5600 XD. I don't know. I even hesitate to guess.
yeah.
They've got some big statistics guys working at AMD who looks at the market and sell through, and they probably said, you know what, if we offer something here, we can probably sell this many units and be able to make this much profit. And our margins are going to be not as good as a 5800, but we're spending less on memory, and it gives our partners a little bit more flexibility in build and quality and where they're willing to sell that. And if they can knock some bucks off by making less expensive components and PCB choices, then great. And I think that's probably the fuzzy logic
Yeah.
that they use to to do this, because there was a big gap in between 199 and 320, and this fits it nicely.
I just wish it had been either a more powerful card or cheaper. It
Yeah.
seems like for whatever reason, and I've been saying this all like the last year, AMD seems to charge as much as they can possibly justify for their GPUs when they're absolutely killing it on the CPU side. The CPU side, you're getting so much value for money, it's insane. And they are just giving Intel fits with what they've done with Ryzen for the last 3 years running. And then over on the GPU side, it's okay, this one compared to NVIDIA, it's close. Like starting with the Radeon 7, the beginning of last year, Radeon 7 comes out. It's the same price as an RTX 2080, and the two of them are kind of back and forth as to who's faster.
Mm-hmm.
And NVIDIA can, of course, point to, well, ours does RTX. And then, of course, they opened that up to the 10 series, and we all know how that has gone
Yeah.
with adoption of ray tracing and that sort of thing. But uh, is it? I don't know. Like on the CPU side, it's absolutely there's no question. Like you look at the top sellers, like the top 20 sellers in CPUs are all Ryzen parts, and there's something interesting at every price point with Ryzen. And we haven't really talked about this very much, but the Ryzen 1600, the Ryzen 5 1600, the
Yeah.
AF variant, the currently available variant of that, is actually a Zen Plus 12 nanometer part
Yeah. And it's
disguised as a first gen.
$89.
85 last time I checked.
6-core 12 thread.
Yeah,
And pretty good clocks.
and
That's insane.
it's literally second gen. It's a Ryzen 5 2600
Yeah.
for $85. So I mean,
Yeah.
at every price point I can think of, I would probably recommend a Ryzen CPU. Like,
Yeah.
just buy an AMD CPU. If you're an enthusiast, if you're on desktop, buy a Ryzen CPU. It's more cores for the money, and yeah, Intel can point to specific use cases where their products are still winning in benchmarks. But I'm just saying, like for everyday computing,
Yeah.
for
I think I actually have a pretty good answer for you
okay,
there.
okay,
And it really is all margins, because if you think about it, AMD and their CPUs, I mean, they order the wafers, they package it, and then they sell it to distributors and OEMs. And with GPUs, you not only have to worry about your own margins, but you've got to worry about your partner margins. Because if they're not making any margins, they don't want to be your partner anymore. And so I think that they have done pricing and performance in that to not only give AMD some money back. I think that they're willing to take some cuts in that, as long as they keep their partners happy and on board with AMD products, until AMD feels that they can have a superior product where their partners will then be more excited to work with them, and compete better with NVIDIA. And so it is almost like they're treading water, and they're giving their partners a lot better margins than what NVIDIA probably is. And that's why we see products. But I mean, it's and then they're setting the price at a point where their partners aren't losing a lot of money, because they have to they pay the same amount for memory on AMD cards as they do for NVIDIA. And so when you're talking components, PCB, manufacturing, I mean, it makes sense where they're doing it. And even though they're not moving as much volume, they're still giving good margins to their partners and being a good partner. Does that make sense to you?
I guess. I mean, I don't really know that side of the business, so enough to comment
Well, I mean,
intelligently
yeah,
about it. But
AMD was taking ASP hits to compete with Intel before Zen 2. And now that they've got 7 nanometer stuff, uh, a pretty small die size per core as compared to what Intel has, and they just have a lot more margin built in because the wafers, the 7 nanometer wafers, are not nearly as expensive as you would expect them to be, as compared to what Intel is probably doing with their 14 nanometer plus and plus plus. So right there, AMD has some built-in margin advantages that they can play around with as compared to what Intel does. And again, Intel is manufacturing constrained right now across many product lines. And even though AMD may not have ordered as many wafers as they needed to really kind of saturate demand, they're catching up now. And again, they've got some leeway that Intel simply doesn't.
yeah, I can't wait to see Big Navi. That's what I've been waiting for, and I'd love to see Big Navi hit, and then everything else kind of trickle down, and them be really competitive on the GPU side. But what you're saying makes sense. It's just not what I want to hear. I want to hear
Yeah,
that they need to be really aggressive and take over some of the market share that NVIDIA's enjoyed for a long time. And now we're going to have Intel this year at some point with their own discrete graphics cards. So there's going to be plenty of competition, and we're going to see something give.
yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun year, at least in terms of technology. Can't say anything outside of that.
Yes. Well, do you have anything else for the group, Josh?
I do not.
Okay. Well, I want to thank anybody and everybody for watching this sort of impromptu fireside chat edition of the PC Perspective podcast. Who knows if this will ever make it into the official lineup, if it'll really be 570 or if that'll be next week when Jim makes his triumphant return. And thank God, because this
Yeah,
was a train wreck, as I should have expected, but, growing pains and trying to learn how to stream live, like while actually doing it, is not a good idea, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know about you,
yeah.
Josh, but yeah. Yep. Josh has been very patient with me behind the scenes for like an extra half hour that you haven't even seen. So, anyway, until next week, thanks for watching. All right.
Good night.
Good night. And you have to go to work.
I do.
Okay. Oh, by the way, while we're still online, still streaming live, I'm going to show people something which you probably can't see very well because of this crappy setup I have here.
No, I can't see anything.
Can you see this? No. You'd see it
Hey,
on the YouTubes maybe.
well, let me look at the YouTubes.
I'll just set this here for a minute. I'm holding up an Appian graphics card. If I'm pronouncing that right. Appian.
Hang on.
This is from 1999.
Which live now? Is it
I
0570?
don't know. Yeah, who knows what
Well,
I
I'm
did.
looking like a moron.
Who knows what we're doing here.
Yeah, South Beach Diet. Come on, come on.
Yeah,
Getting past there.
skip ad.
Okay, Appian Graphics.
Okay. So this is a Geronimo 2000 graphics card.
Huh.
Have you ever heard of this? It's new in the box. I'm the moron who bought this from some like e-waste
It sounds
seller for 20
familiar, but
bucks.
I just can't place it.
And it looks like one of those like Voodoo 5000 cards. It's got two big heat sinks on it. So I looked this up on VGA Museum, and apparently it's a what is it now? Got it pulled up here. It's not like an unknown thing. It's a what was that other 3D
S3?
3D Labs.
Oh,
it's a
for media type?
it's a Glint R3.
Oh.
So this is oh boy. What
I
is
do
this?
remember that. That thing was super expensive workstation
Yeah,
graphics card.
this has 64 megabytes of memory in it apparently. Or no, I think this must be a cut down version. I'm only seeing a few of the memory slots populated. This is like a 16
Mhm.
megabyte version, I think. Yeah, it's a 16 megabyte. But yeah, this is a beastly looking card if you can even see it on the stream. And it's still
Yeah,
sealed. This is I've never taken it out of the box.
nice.
But at some point, I was planning on doing an obscurity build, like find the most obscure parts I have on hand. And of course, you can't go wrong with the, if this even shows up, with the Ryze MP6 CPU. Are you familiar with this, Josh?
No.
Ryze was a short-lived CPU company. It was a Pentium kind of equivalent MMX
Hmm.
processor. I don't think they were even allowed to sell it in the U.S. because of, you know, patent cross licensing or whatever infringement problems Intel had with them. And I don't know if it works because it was only a BGA format chip,
Oh, geez.
and so it was available in a socket 7, but it was just a BGA like on this like, what is this, just a package or substrate. It's like with the correct like number of pins.
Hmm.
Apparently a lot of these don't work. I bought it from the same Chinese seller everybody else was buying them from, and I think I paid like $60 for it,
Oh,
honestly.
wow.
But I don't even know if it works. I haven't tried it yet. So at some point I will put this into a socket 7 motherboard and see if it even works. And then
Oh,
if it
geez.
does, I'm throwing in the Geronimo 2000 graphics card. I'll make a
Yeah,
crazy Ryze MP6 workstation. Anyway, thank you for
crazy.
doing this with me, Josh.
Yeah, no problem.
And
Thank you.
yeah, I'm gonna take the stream down. Bye,
Okay.
guys.